with a minion to combo with, etc. So the healing, although it looks like it's there, isn't. But Paladin with potentially 2+ Librams of Hope could be a bit of a problem. But I will say, this lack of Libram of Judgment from Floki could make this matchup a little bit harder just because of these specific tech choices.
Yeah, that's exactly right. However, I will say that the real thing that this mage deck struggles against, ignoring what the paladin may be weak or strong to, is really just tempo in the early game, because it really doesn't want to use its combo pieces on clearing the board. Its minions that it plays are actually severely understated for the most part. They really don't contest board very well. And when you're facing down a hand like this, which I believe Floki has full kept, you are going to start dying very, very quickly.
Yeah, you're always going to be happy if there's Hand of Adol and Crab Rider in your hand along with a coin. And I do completely agree. Often, when this mage deck falls behind early, you really are looking for, like, Phoenix, take some damage, and then go for, say, an Arcane Explosion, right? Or, in maybe a perfect world, a Raz Frost Whisper to have some AoE, because at that point, if you're falling behind, you can't really rely on spell damage arcane missiles against something like Paladin because the health on the minions is simply too high. But already Tryson does just get that first minion down, so that's going to help. And I do wonder now if Floki is going to continue with his Crab Rider plan. I can't see anything else to do for me, Derek, but maybe I just like the card too much to not going out.
Like, coin Crab Rider into Hand of Adal is... It's the play, and it's what he should do. The problem, of course, is that if they have exactly Frostbolt in hand, especially comboed with the spell damage, this can go very, very wrong here. Because then you go coin, you have Hand of Adal, and nothing to cast it on. I think given the unlikeliness of them having exactly Frostbolt after a full mull, is worth just going for coin Crab Rider, and it is going to work out gorgeously here.
Interesting.
Now, call me crazy.
You're crazy.
But because the Crab Rider was coined out, and it wasn't to try and chip away at this 1-3, would it ever have been worth to just go Arcane Explosion and then sort of bump it to put the Crab at a 1-1?
I can see the thinking. I think this kind of accomplishes a similar effect. Like, you are losing the Sorcerer's Apprentice here, which is brutal. But this, in my opinion, is actually very, very good recognition from Treason that it's recognition of what the deck is weak to. As I said, it's this early development that you struggle against as the mage. And by... sacrificing the Sorcerer's Apprentice at the start, he loses that combo potential, but he gains time by clearing off this Crab Rider. If he had saved that here, and a second Hand of Adal had come down, I think it would just be GG on the spot.
Especially with the Argent Braggart potentially to follow up with another chunky minion. And one thing I will say as well, as we appear to have some slight issue. Oh, there we go. We're catching up now, at least on my end. Is I think when you play this deck for the first time, you forget that Sorcerer's Apprentice isn't the be-all and end-all, because we're so used to Sorcerer's Apprentice being insane in, like, Cyclone Mage. It really is more of a throwaway card that you can get cool combos out of, but you definitely don't need to. So again, I do like Tryson going for it there, and he's already clapping, as I believe that is the second elemental to proc his elemental allies.
Absolutely. I mean, it tells you how important of a draw it is that he will gladly forego Jandis on 5. Yeah. That's how important the card draw is in this deck, and absolutely correctly so that he does in this instance. Keeps the card draw going. Another allies, another studies. You know, this is okay. He definitely still needs a little bit of extra help, but he's back in the game now. From what was a disastrous start, he's very much in a position where he could win.
Part of me does like Netherwind Portal to consider there as well, because it would have fit the curve. He still has stuff to do next turn as well, but I think you're expecting at this point, I guess you're expecting the Truth Seeker from Floki at this point on curve, but if there's any other buff spell played instead, then you just gain an additional minion that they have to punch through. But Tryson did go for just going a little bit wider there, getting some more spells and cards in hand. So he does have plenty of options going into this Phoenix turn, which is going to be Tryson's next turn.
Yeah, that's right. I like the thinking of Netherwind Portal, but Arcane Missiles in this deck is just broken, especially when there's going to be a Phoenix coming out next turn. Like, it's ludicrous amounts of damage that he can push forward, especially when it could be potentially comboed with Jandis even on the same turn.
And this is exactly what I love. And when you were talking earlier about setting things up, the dormant effect of the Phoenix allows you to just set up and plan very powerful turns. And I think we might see one with triple arcane missiles.
It's how you structure the rest of the turn, which is interesting, because you kind of want to play the mana reservoir beforehand to get an extra +3 missiles. But then you kind of want to play the elemental allies beforehand, but then you are, again, reliant on drawing an elemental off the top.
I wonder if because, I know it's tough, but because he has enough cards, he has Jandis and a Fireball, I did wonder if there was ever a chance to actually, again, go for the Mana Reservoir and that Arcane Explosion to reduce the health down on board and then pump the missiles out.
Interesting.
Oh, 4 damage Arcane Explosion. Oh, jeez.
Very, very strong. Interesting that he's foregoing the missiles entirely here. Like, as you were saying very astutely at the start, there is the threat of heal in Paladin that you always need to be aware of. So even if he was launching, what would this even be, like 18 damage he could go for here with just all these missiles, even if he could only play 2 of them on this turn. It's very possibly just going to get healed up before you deliver lethal. So it's I can kind of respect the reserved nature of Trahezen's play here.
I do think where you can stumble with this deck sometimes is we see Trahezen be, I'm going to say defensive there. You know, like you said, not using the arcane missiles, just clearing off the board. But the problem is, even if Floki just goes Libram of Justice and kills this Phoenix and maybe even goes over the top and like brooms the elemental as well, the arcane reservoir, sorry.
Yeah.
Then you are losing a lot of damage over the course of the game if this happens once or twice. Because other than the AoE, this Phoenix spell damage hasn't really done any damage, which is what you really need to push. And we are going to see it happen here to an extent when this Phoenix is going to be cleaned up.
Yeah, it wasn't the best Phoenix of all time. Like, if he had got Cram Session exactly, wow, off of the elemental allies, then it would be a very different story indeed. But all of a sudden, the wheels are starting to come off here for Trahezen because he misses the other elemental. Higher best, like.
All right, I just love Trahezen's like expressions as he sees Abbas, and he's like, "Wait a minute, what spells could I actually get if I just chuck a missiles out now?"
Perhaps.
I mean, it can go very wrong with Fireball, but it could go very well with Cram Session.
Yeah. Even there's one Arcane Intellect in there as well.
Right.
I guess cards such as like Primordial Studies would be, I would say, like a neutral outcome, because you wouldn't get to pick, but... Oh, there we go, the claps.
Disgusting! A Jandis that draws you 2 cards? Oh my god, that is perfect for Trahezen. I mean, the wheels are back on.
Yeah, oh, and the missile hit the taunt as well. That's what he was after too. Makes this this board be a little bit stickier for him.
So Floki has full information that basically everything has 1 health now, both the Abbess and obviously the Jandis and the Rhino. So he can clear this up very nicely. This is still fine for Floki. The real threat there, the real problem, was actually just the card draw that it gave.
Yeah, it's definitely more of a problem for future Floki as opposed to present Floki right now. He does get to draw that Blessing of Wisdom. It's going to help him at least cycle. I think he should go for the draw now, right? I'm not sure why he would Penflinger first.
Yeah, I mean, unless he gets a buff. He's already played both Hand of Adals. Yeah, I don't know. Interesting way to go about it.
Just like this, because he could always weapon down, and now he's just drawing last with 0 mana. Okay. And he could have played the Devout Pupil instead, so...
Yeah, it was a bit weird.
Someday I'll be just like you.
But okay, 1 Thief coming down. We're obviously looking for card draw. Another
Elementals
allies.
again!
Yeah, you're not looking for that. Pyroblast, though, more damage. Amping it up here. The entire hand now is damage for Trahezen. But it's, even with all of this, if you just launched all this damage to face, you are still not looking at lethal here, even if you don't consider the healing that obviously could come into play for Floki.
And this is where we're probably going to see something plus ping. This is where it's like old freeze mage style of how many pings do you need to fit in along with the rest of your cards. We are going to see it. There you go. That's the cleanest one, fireball ping. I wonder if he's going to do arcane missiles, but I imagine not. I think you would expect missiles to be better in the future of this game as opposed to now.
Yeah, there's the upside of saving it is potentially spell damage. The downside of saving it is that there could be a bunch of minions in play. You always have to consider just launching arcane missiles as soon as you have a clear board. But, you know, as I said, if he just launches everything at the face here, he does not win this game. He needs something a bit more impressive to carry him through to a victory right now.
I do love a good
And this is, again, one of the odd moments in a game when you're against heal that you can get into, because Tristan's never really gained the board in an offensive manner. He hasn't had any Confection Cyclones yet, so he's not been able to, you know, not only proc the elementals with them, but just have the minions on board. It's the 3-2 and 2 1-2s, and we're already looking that he's just a few points of damage away of, like, 3-turn lethal, I guess, if you want to phrase it like that.
Yeah. Well, there's an Ellie. Yeah, the dream is here. But he, of course, needs a bit of luck, as you were saying, with pretty much exclusively the Confection Cyclones, and I guess the second Phoenix as well would also get the job done.
And this is one of those games where I can completely understand the Zephyrus tech we've been seeing dotting around in this list.
Oh, true.
Because suddenly you think, okay, well, my damage isn't quite getting there, but also he is drawing many, many cards, so the Zephyrus would be active. And as TJ enjoyed immensely when I cast with him earlier today, the Zephyrus procs elemental allies, which is another great use for it. But there is Libram of Hope. I think we're hitting the turning point here for Floki.
Yeah, I am starting to struggle to see a way for Treheason to win this, because again, this deck effectively cannot gain board control, even against the most pathetic of board decks. It just doesn't win that way. It relies purely on these broken combos, loads of spell damage, loads of spells, drawing 1 trillion cards over the course of the game. And while Treheason got close, he activated his allies, got lucky with the Jandis. Quite clearly, it wasn't even close to getting the job done.
Yeah, I think generally when you're playing this Burn Mage, if any minions you have on board get to hit face once, that is a great victory, because it doesn't happen often. And you see Triton, with just not a lot of options, chooses correctly in just saying, well, I have 10 mana, let's just get this Pyroblast out of the way, deal the damage, and maybe some other pieces of some damage come together for him, because he still has a bit of damage and there isn't a second Libram of Hope. But I think for now, I would actually love to see Floki just drop down Liadrin and just say, yes, there's 13 health that he could die, but it's unlikely. And instead, he's going to get that Libram of Hope locked in for next turn.
Yeah, I mean, unless there's a lethal setup, which I don't think there is there. Yeah, with only one Libram of Wisdom having been played. I was thinking even with Hand of Adals that are playable, it doesn't quite work out in this instance. But as you say, the main thing is that you get plenty of threats on board. They have to deal 13 to you, which I think with one Fireball already having gone down is not impossible, but extremely difficult at this point.
Yeah, 3 health. Triton has to do something pretty magnificent. It would probably have to exactly be an elemental. He can proc his elemental allies here, right?
I think so.
Oh, no, he can't. He Pyroblasted. What are we talking about?
Oh, it was a turn in.
He can't, right? Yeah.
Well, it means he can get all missiles to face and win the game in an absolute freak of statistics.
You always make the play.
Oh,
Don't blame him for going for it, though, but it does mean Floki is going to take game number 1 with the Paladin versus Mage. But you did see there, the second you don't draw that Libram of Hope, he was in trouble, right? He was pretty much dead at that point if you didn't get a hold of the Libram of Hope fast enough. So even though it does look overall favourable for Paladin because of the heal, you do have to draw it first. But good game there for Floki. Both these players on an 8-0 score so far. So even this last round loss, they're still looking pretty good. I'm going to just commit to a top 16 finish. So this is looking very, very good for both. But still, you do want to go out on top in this kind of Swiss tournament, right?
Yeah, exactly. They are both guaranteed top 16 at this point. But like I say, if you can complete a flawless run through a competition this fierce, if they were to go on all the way to win the championship, it would be something that you can be very, very proud of indeed. And with Floki one game up, the Paladin out of the way as well, very importantly, as we've been consistently saying, has looked like a real weak spot this weekend. He's left now with just his Rogue, the classic World Kick Rogue, and a Highlander Priest. He has a pretty generic lineup for the most part, aside from the Pain Warrior, which is a bit of a deviation from the norm. And, I mean, because of that, I think he's in a great spot. Both of these decks have a very reasonable chance of taking down the Mage specifically, especially the Priest with access to Mind Render Elucia can just delete this Mage deck on the spot.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Priest, I think, still is his weaker deck that he's got left, because I think Rogue just can deal with Warlock fairly easily. And, you know, yeah, it can be a bit rough versus the Mage, but still has plenty of tricks on its own. But yeah, although the Priest has the ability to just completely ruin the Mage deck, you still have to draw Elucia and also not die while you draw it, right? So it's a little bit risky, but it looks like Tristan is going to go over to his Rogue now, which is, of course, the World Kick Rogue, with just a small nod as well to that Flick Sky Shiv there, just a solo card on the right, making everything a little bit more messy, but a card that not everyone is actually including. Definitely feels like one of those slots where you can be a little bit creative sometimes.
Yeah, that's true. I am personally a big fan of Flick. I think even if you ignore the metagame completely, it's just a very, very powerful card to run in a Hearthstone deck. Personally, I'm a bit more of a fan of the triple legendary strategy where you slot in Edwin as well. After putting it in my deck and trying it on ladder for a couple days, still a pretty large proportion of my games are just won on the spot by Edwin, especially with Foxy Fraud being able to play it, step it, play it, and bank the mana in a way for a turn 2 Edwin potentially. It's just still a very, very powerful Hearthstone card, I think, which is why I'm personally not a fan necessarily of the ultra-refined version that you could have... I'm not a fan of Trehesen's version as opposed to the super refined version, but it's still a very, very strong deck.
Yeah, so really what Derek's saying here is he prefers this list.
Just about.
As Edwin, instead of the Flick there, or at least close enough anyway. So we'll see how this one does pay off. And these mirrors, as is, I feel like, been the case for, what, a year and a half maybe now, these Rogue mirrors, can go very wildly different directions. You can get the ones where one of them manages to land a quest in or Van Cleef, and it ends very, very quickly. Or we can get into all sorts of shenanigans where there's cards from classes we don't even know about yet. Involved in the game, it feels like sometimes. Like they can go pretty wild if it becomes one of those kind of resource generation wars instead of more just a board-focused fight to the death.
Yeah, you know when you start throwing monk spells at each other that you've gone a little bit too far down the rogue rabbit hole. Potential spoilers, who knows? Obviously not. Floki here.
Now it's like, just leak the new
Yes. Got ya. But with, as we were saying, the Priest, you were saying it could be the slightly weaker class here as opposed to the Rogue. And to an extent, I do agree, but they are just both classes that if they get the goods, they can win any matchup. It really makes no difference here. And so going into the Rogue mirror, I think I would have to give, again, just the slight advantage to Floki here. I think it's obviously unlikely that Edwin just wins the game on its own at the start, but you have to factor in a couple of percentage points that it could just end the game on turn 3.
I mean, we've seen it enough, right? You can never count it out because it just has happened many times, even just in competitive, like on-screen Hearthstone. Never mind the millions of ladder games that Derek kills people with Edwin as well, so adding to that number. But already, I know I maybe push it too far sometimes, Derek, but I do view you as a rogue specialist. What do you make of at least these post-Mulligan opening hands?
Well, Floki has got himself a very juicy starting hand. It's something that I have been, I go back and forth on is the power of Miscreant in the deck, because I am a real Miscreant believer. I think that it is the unsung hero of the deck in essentially every matchup. And talking to some of the other guys who are bringing Rogue this tournament, some of the other UK players, they were definitely emphasizing the fact that they think I keep it too much in the Mulligan. But I think this game, with Foxy Fraud Miscreant, even just Prep Miscreant here, we are going to see the power of this card. Because Rogue really struggles with wide boards. So if you can get some of the lackeys that give you that wide board presence or fight for board very well, like Kobold Lackey, Faceless Lackey, Goblin Lackey, you can just run away with the board right from the start.
Yeah, it is kind of funny, isn't it, where like Rogue is weak against what it does itself, which is very amusing because it does make those awkward scenarios for even other archetypes where the board's like not big enough to feel like a threat.
Yeah.
They exist and will kill you over time. So very, very interesting overall. But both players kind of keeping up with each other for now. Obviously no Nitro Boost Poison for Floki at the moment, but he does have the Foxy Fraud on board to make up for it.
Yeah, there was a very, very different line that Floki could have taken on this turn of questing Backstab Coin Nitro Boost, which would have cleared the opponent's board, and of course got a 5/5 questing in play. Pretty susceptible, I suppose, because there is the 3/2 buffed weapon, so there's a very reasonable chance that your opponent can clear, which is why, again, I think that the Miscreant is a very reasonable way to go and just start getting that wide board happening.
Yeah, and suddenly even just this Miscreant is a reasonable threat. The second one comes down for Tryson now with even more of those lackeys to back it up. And also, these two Plunderers just kind of innocently sitting there in the far left of his hand, along with these lackeys, can make an extremely strong tempo sort of response, right? If Floki tries to build a board of his own, well, Tryson can like play most of his hand out and just kill almost anything with those two Plunderers.
So the first play I'm obviously seeing here is just coin, backstab, prep, and eviscerate alongside the questing, of course, to buff it up, clear the board, and swing things quite decidedly in your favor. It demands an answer from Draheeson 100%, but thankfully for him, he can more than step up to the plate.
Yeah, the first big push here from Floki. And now just with an absolute array of one drops to, flesh out however he really wants to. Does look pretty good, and even... Ooh. I'll tell you now, I could watch Tryson on camera all day. Look at the...
Interesting. That's kind of the one I was considering the least.
Oh, I was looking at Dare and Escape, because look at his hand. He can bounce the Plunderers.
That's
not necessarily
true.
this turn, but...
No, that's true.
Give me that. Look what I want.
Like, these Plunderers feel very powerful.
They do. I was just thinking that having any access to AoE, given that your opponent has played a Miscreant at this point, feels pretty valuable. So, 4 mana, 3 damage to the enemy board, even if it destroys your dagger, felt pretty respectable to me, actually. But, when I look at it a bit more critically, I can see that this Daring Escape could be very, very strong.
And look at the value. He's going to Dare and Escape everything, and yes, he loses his board, but he's dealt with the questing and pretty much gets to do that, or close to it, all over again next turn.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether I would have used it that turn. I think I would have tried to maybe get a smaller one the turn after.
Yeah.
But we'll see how it pays off for him. And Tryson now is going through an emotional roller coaster at this point, because 1 minute he seems very happy, and now I feel like he might, or at least he looks like he's disappointed with that play.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I was not so much a fan of going for the Daring Escape at the end there. I can see the reasoning, but like, even with double prize plunder being bounced back, he did just cede a lot of tempo and a lot of damage to face. Like, you got to remember, World Kick starts ramping up the pressure real quickly once you start going Eviscerate, Nitro Boost, even Cold Blood off of the World Kick later on. So he's going to have to get a lot of advantage now out of the cards he bounced back, I think, to make it worth it.
Yeah, I think I imagined that would be a few minions get traded off by Floki that turn, and then he can like bounce a smaller amount of things to get some repeat performance from the Plunderer. But they are still scrapping for this board, and it is important to note as well for Tryson and I guess Floki too. Like, this tournament's been going on for a while, and it's getting quite late. So I think even just actual real fatigue is kicking in for these players pretty heavily right now.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a weird time zone for us, but for Draheeson, it's what, 8 o'clock in the morning tomorrow? At this point, he's living in the future.
Yeah. It's been definitely an all-nighter. And if you're not used to it especially, it's tough. But question number 2 coming down here for Floki. And the problem here, I would say at least, is if this questing doesn't achieve much, he is starting to run a little bit low on resources.
Well, I mean, if you're scared of your questing dying, I've got a great answer for that, Raven. You can just bounce it all right back. It worked great for Treason. Why doesn't Floki give it a go too?
Or because he knows that Treason bounced it all back, he could just take play drives and presume he's going to play it all back again next.
Yeah, I think going with the value option here is definitely the way to go. You know, Daring Escape had a couple of ways to get a bit of utility with the Draconic Lackey, I suppose. But just copying anything you can from Treason here is more likely to be a much more effective refill.
I think here, whatever happens this turn, as long as the questing dies, Treason can probably be okay with this. But the big deal here is how much Treason's considering play dries. So I'd actually like to see just this, Fireball, and stop.
Okay, yeah. I guess once he realized that it's not dirty tricks,
Right.
I'm okay with just stopping here. Like, the fact that his hand works well without having to be on board is a perfectly good reason to stop. Like, if anything big comes down, he just has the flick, or he can go for Miscreant. This hand works without having to tempo it too heavily on the board.
Yeah, the Fireball may be less of a big deal, but he did hand over an Ethereal Lackey, which could mix things up a lot for Floki in terms of that resource generation that he does need.
Well, yet more resource generation. I guess Cobalt Spellkin is probably the way to go, given that Big Ol' Whelp, you'd kind of just be looking for Secret Passage anyway, so you may as well give yourself 2 chances of finding it.
That is true. I was thinking about just having a bigger minion, just full stop on board,
Yeah,
one
that's
that's
true.
less ignorable,
Oh.
I guess. And he just rips it anyways.
That's what we call the caster's blessing, as opposed to the caster's curse.
Wow, I don't like reading too much into these things, but I think Treason must be tired because he just keeps slapping himself in the face. And I think it's just to try and stay awake, or at least try and stay focused. It must be very, very rough for him over there.
It's either to try and stay awake, I hope, or to try and stay warm in a more bleak outlook on it.
One stab,
That's a good point. Would you rather be really cold or very tired?
I'd go with really tired. I kind of live like that all the time anyway.
Okay.
I'm also blooming freezing all the time as well, because houses in England were built 1,000 years ago, apparently.
That is true. And it looks like, yeah, Treason going again just for the
Damn.
dagger. I guess respecting another secret, which, yes, is plagiarized again. So he's doing a good job of this, honestly, because he has so many great resources. One Thief there, Swindle, of course, the questing, the evil Miscreant he bounced back, 20 turns ago at this point. And he's doing a great job of not handing it over to Floki, but welcome to an extremely powerful card, as Secret Passage is just play with a new hand. You don't like this? Put it over there for a minute. It's so powerful to just shuffle through the deck.
And he gets a very decent hand. I'm looking much more heavily at the Jandis, I think, than the Edwin here. Depending on what you get off the Swindle.
Yes.
But the fact that you can step it back, I think, just makes it, oh my god, absolutely perfect. And Greybow off of the Jandis is absurd.
Yeah, and also, funnily enough, this Shattered Rumbler could be powerful as well if it was Shadow Stepped. It's not going to be,
Right.
but just its effect against Rogue specifically, if you cast a spell, it deals 2 to the minions.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
that cleans up a lot of Rogue stuff. He's not going to Shadow Step it, but you can dream, right? One day we'll see that card be good.
Oh man, this is really tough to get through. Like, obviously the thing about Greybow is you can always clear off all other minions on the board and then kill it, but in this instance, he doesn't have the goods. No backstab plus eviscerate. You can go prep Swindle.
Well, you can go fishing with one thief, right? There's a lot of transform effects available.
That's
Isn't going
true.
to hit it, but there's enough to make it worthwhile trying for. Has the prep as well to help out. He could also... I was looking at Blizzard to say freeze the board, not necessarily trade it all off and maybe wait to try and do something better, but I don't think that really works.
I think Blizzard was very tempting on that turn. Just the fact that you can freeze it all in place, it would just be a 5-4 left on board in terms of immediate stats, and then try and just ride your questing through to a victory.
Choose soon.
Well, kick this, and then Titanic? What do you even give taunt to? Would it be the questing, or maybe one of the smaller minions just to get in the way?
I think you give it to one of the smaller minions, right? So the death rattle won't go off.
Oh, true.
Or potentially won't go off. You know, obviously there are different ways to go about it, but I do like this. Just saying, well, if he's not going to wait to get through this 1/4/1 thief, then this 5/6 really just is a non-existent threat at this point.
And while Floki has finally gained himself a way to actually get some value, get some threats on the board, he's dying very, very quickly while that is all going on. And so, I mean, Jandis Flick looks a little shaky. You'd have to be getting a taunt to feel safe at all in that situation.
Yeah, I'm trying to look something along the lines of potentially something else, a lot like Fireball, Nitro Boost, and then Prize Plunderers, you know, to remove the threats there like that. If you do Fireball on the questing, use maybe a Prize Plunderer as well, and then use the second one to clear something else up. It's tough, though.
I think I like starting with Jandis. Like, you can go Jandis, Miscreant, play one of the lackeys, and you still have mana for double Prize Plunderer. And then you could go like Prize Plunderer, maybe even on the one thief, just to clear the taunt out of the way, and then sacrifice the Rumbler in.
Oh, it's going to go for Flick. Obviously not a problem for Floki because he's already used his 2 questing, so he doesn't lose anything here, but it is I guess, the most mana for the least amount of cards played for these Prize Plunderers.
What is this? Ends?
Did you get it? Did you get it?
No. Well, I mean, he got the backstab. Okay, he gets the attack in. Was he looking specifically for prep? I guess he has a couple of them left in the deck, but like finding exactly prep and a Vis there and sacrificing the secret passage to look for it, a little dubious, I think, at the end there as time was running out.
And also as well now, especially with backstab into one thief, this could just be lethal because Apexis Blast is already there for a start. There's 4 damage from the Flick. So he can still Miscreant for a... Does Kobold Lackey gets him there, right?
Yeah, you start with Miscreant. And
Or Rush Lackey. Oh.
Okay, if you miss, you just go Blizzard here, right?
Yeah,
You don't
yeah.
mess around with lethal. This is still very much winning the game right now.
And of course, next turn, if there's no taunts, then he just has Redagger Apexis Blast. Done. There's going to have to be some Jandis magic coming out here.
We're in double Earth Elemental territory rather quick.
And that is not where you want to be. Oh.
Either in a game of Hearthstone or real life.
Yeah.
Yeah, didn't get the Titanic, so a big Edwin plus Titanic is kind of out of the question now.
There is Fireball
So
Kobold
many
Lackey,
options.
and just say you have a Miscreant 1 damage. Do you have an Eviscerate? But it feels so likely that there'll be damage. I think he might have to just bite the bullet and say, is him having enough damage with the Miscreant Dagger plus X more or less likely than Jandis giving him taunts?
It's impossible to calculate in this small amount of time, and so whichever one he goes for, I can respect it. Unlikely to work, of course, and as we can see, Treheason has got the goods to close this one out with a Pexis to the face to equalize us at 1 game apiece. Getting a win with the Rogue in the mirror is a pretty big deal. You know, Floki is still left with the Rogue, as you were correctly saying, one of the stronger decks. But you can just see already what that meant to Trahezen, getting that one step closer to being able to tweet out to his rabid fans, as he has been doing after every round, that he has won the Swiss and finished 9-0.
I'm pretty sure you can see, the relief on every single turn that he plays so far, because he's a very emotive player, something I enjoy a lot. And I think there was a moment, especially just after he bounced all his minions back, where he was not pleased with what he'd done. So I am glad, at least for him, that he recovered. He did end out the game strong, but it was very close. There was a moment where Floki looked like out of nowhere he got back in that game, and this is the turn I was talking about. Suddenly, yeah, he's got a full hand, but he lost the board, but he did manage to recover, even with those few plagiarizes that Floki tried to use to get back in the game.
I'm telling you, man, it's the deceptive power of Miscreant. Floki went questing into questing that game, and it was, fairly strong. He made a couple of 3-mana 5/5s and 6/6s, but Trahezen was able to just get that continual value, that board control, that removal that the lackeys afford you. And the chip damage came in turn by turn, always being just ahead on board, and very easily won in the end. It's a good recognition of the matchup, I think, on his part.
Yeah, and honestly, really tough, I think, these rogue mirrors, even from back when it was, I guess, Secret Rogue, when we saw Bunny Hopper continue, week after week in GM to pilot it to a very impressive standard, is that it is a matchup, I feel, where you can't make a mistake. If you mess up, you fall behind, and then that's just it. So always a nice one to get a win in that mirror. And as you mentioned, it does mean that there's still that Burn Mage and Zoo left for Trahezen, and then the Rogue and Highlander Priest for Floki. So even though there are similarities in the lineups of both of these players, it has ended up where we've got two very different pairs of decks against each other. The slower, more value control paced decks for Floki versus the high level aggro for Trahezen. So I'm pretty pumped to see the rest of the games. I kind of wish we were already in the next game, because this is exciting stuff.
It's going to be very, very exciting stuff. I've been a big fan of watching Zoo. I think that it's, weirdly enough, for what has almost become a deck that's been synonymous with easy, to be perfectly honest. People always talk about Zoo as, a good beginner deck. It teaches you about trading and card advantage, minion advantage, things like that. I think it's the deck that I've had the most decisions that I've disagreed with on players over the course of this weekend. There's so many different ways that you can approach it in the mulligan, in the mid game, because it's definitely not the straightforward Zoo of old that we've come to see over Hearthstone's history. But we're not going to get it quite yet. It is instead what is undeniably a very difficult deck in the Burn Mage for Trahezen.
Yeah, although maybe a little bit more straightforward in this matchup, because it is not often you have to consider or worry about any heal against Rogue. Obviously, things can happen to lead to heal with all the Rogue shenanigans that they do, but generally, you know that there's a strong level of damage permanence when you're against this. So, lab partner being kept, no surprise, and everything else being tossed, I like it.
Gets himself a hand pretty similar to what he had in the first game, actually, with just lab partner apprentice, no card draw quite yet, but Convection Cyclone, just a single elemental allies away from this hand going turbo.
Yeah, and the really nice thing I like about this card, and probably why it's so high in mulligan win rates, is that you can do this. You don't need to save this part for the quest, right? This is just a 3-2 on curve in a deck where you don't really have many aggressive minions, so it's just nice to get it out there. Gives you the 2 elementals in hand ready for the quest, whilst putting some level of threat on board, so I like it.
Fireball, I guess, is just the best one of those cards. Mage is a nigh on entirely defenseless deck, so if you just start launching stuff at the face, eventually it's going to get there. A weird old hand.
A weird turn as well, because again, a part of me just wants to see a Sorcerer's Apprentice this turn, regardless of what the other plays are, because even if it's traded into, it's 3 damage cashed into Floki's face, right? Like, you're 3 damage closer.
Yeah, I mean, clearly Floki has demonstrated he doesn't have backstab in hand, which is definitely a big reason to go for the Sorcerer's Apprentice. I still just feel like there's so many ways that they can deal with it or even just ignore it, actually, to be perfectly honest. Even if this apprentice does stick on board, you really don't gain that much of an advantage from having it in play quite yet. So I'm perfectly fine with Treason taking the slow route here. Neither feels great, but this, I think, on average, has a slightly higher upside.
Nitro Boost is going to come down though, and that is quite the problem. One, that's quite an early Nitro Boost anyway, but also just it hitting the 2 durability weapon. I think a lot of the times you're forced into a Nitro Boost and it hits like 1 durability, for example, and it's much less of a problem, but that's just a casual 6 damage kind of out of nowhere. Just from the weapon, I mean.
Yeah. It's a very, very big deal, and it's definitely going to force an answer from Treason, as, again, he gets what is essentially a dead card in another lab partner. And now things are going from bad to worse, really, because he's played all of his elementals. He's already drawn, in a way, 4 elementals this game. And now if he draws the side quest, it's yet another dead card.
Spin like the suns, strike like the winds.
Yeah, very nice play.
Yeah, this is just not only value, but board control as well. Bouncing this 1 thief, and again another spell. Also, the World Kick's on board, so that's basically 2 cards for 1 for Floki. And he's buffing his Quested Adventurer. Everything looking fantastic. And Treason has to respond now. He can't leave this question up. Yes, he has a Frostbolt to freeze it out, but really, he needs to kill this.
And so now off the Primordial Studies, we're looking for Blood Mage Thalnos, I guess, to draw a card.
Well, I also think, isn't he going to AoE, right? He's going to Arcane Explosion this turn.
Oh, yeah.
So the extra spell damage.
Oh, it says explode!
Does not feel good, though. I'll say that. He is expending all of his resources here. And while I was saying this is a deck that essentially cannot gain board control, he's going for the very rare opportunity where you can actually try and squeak out a win with that game plan. Because even if he doesn't win the game here, he's hoping to get 8, 9, maybe 10 damage to the face on the following turn, depending on what happens, and then just burn off the top for lethal.
Right, and for Treason, he needs this Thalnos to probably get him more card draw as opposed to, a Fireball, for example, right? He'll really want a Cram Session, the 1 Arcane Intellect, or even desperation levels of like 1 Thief or Elemental allies and then draw exactly into 2 Elementals. It's going to be a tough one here.
Deciding to kill off the lab partner instead is interesting, as Cram Session off the top for 3 cards, plus an extra from Thalnos. That is pretty much the only card that could pull him back in the game, and the draw train continues into Cram Session. Raz, Jandis, all of a sudden, this deck is just going beast mode.
It is, and there's 5 damage cashed in because there's 2 spell damage. Going to be Arcane Missiles as well, and I imagine we're going to see that Confection Cyclone down.
Absolutely.
Guess you'll see what he draws first. Yep.
Okay, sure. Well, it's cheaper, I suppose.
And now suddenly there's Fireball, there's Raz, there's pings to weave in with those cards too. The Phoenix is there as well. So I think at this point, because Trison's on 27, he can actually, even if this board gets cleaned, he's just got like Phoenix, Raz, and then, Fireball. Even if he has to wait and play Jandis in between that to wait for the Phoenix to go off, he has plenty of damage to end this game.
Yeah, this is nigh on a lock victory here for Treason. It's very, very difficult for Floki to win this game now. And what I really want to say is that actually, I think for Treason here, this has been one of the better played games that we've seen all weekend. Because while you were advocating for Apprentice on turn 3, and at the time, I was very close to being persuaded. It seemed like a very logical way to go about the game when you didn't have any card draw. But what he did instead was start pooling all those apprentices, the lab partners as well, and build up to one massive swing turn. He went for that on the turn when the questing came down, and just that little bit of damage he was able to squeak through, obviously with a bit of help from Cram Session off the top, led to just enough damage to close out the game here. I think this was a gorgeous example of spell damage mage when you don't get the good hands.
Right. And that's it, right? Because those big sorcerers, like double sorcerer's apprentice turns, don't happen that often.
Yeah.
But if you can pull them off, they're always going to be stronger. Now, yeah, the cram session into cram session definitely saved Tryson here, because if that board did get cleaned up, then he would have been in some pretty big trouble.
And I think he pretty much knows that there's nothing that Floki can get here in the entire deck. Like, one Thieves have all gone, so there's not even any chance of counterspell. Even if there was a counterspell, obviously Trahezen could still win then. I'm just not seeing it.
Is there like secret passage into Jandis into something that can heal him?
I guess Waterbearer, yeah. Sandhoof Waterbearer plus a way to kill off the Raz Frost Whisperer is a good a chance as any.
Nope. Tyson was worried then. He was like, not Sandhoof. It definitely wasn't. The Raz is dealt with, but of course we know that Tyson is prepared for this anyway. Simply the Fireball and Ping will be enough. And the Burn Mage didn't get the job done at the start of this series, but is going to be able to bank that win and put Tryson only one win away from that 9-0 score in Swiss, Derek.
Just a beautiful game from Trees, and that was a pleasure to watch. As you know, we can all win the games with this deck, where you draw the side quest, the elementals, the cram sessions get the perfect draw. It takes a little bit more creativity to win these kind of games. So very well done by Trahezen. Down to now only with the mage out of the way, the Zoo Warlock as the sole deck, which I will say has not been looking stellar so far this weekend, but that has been a very underrepresentative series of games. It has drawn especially awkwardly. A lot of the times I've seen, like, I think RDU had an especially rough go of it. Pain as well, having a bit of a rough time with his Zoo. You know, drawing Flesh Giants plus Hand of Gul'dan at the same time, which can often be very, very awkward. But most of the time, I think this is a very, very competent deck right now, and under a very competent player as well. He's in with a good shot of going flawless through the Swiss.
Yeah, and I think also, as you can see, Tryson just seems to be feeling it, right? You know, he's pretty hyped about, you know, his turns. He knows, or at least it looks like he's very aware of the setups, and you know, once we'll see the replay of the game, yes, he basically had no cards in hand and got the cram session off the top, but he also made the play for a big draw to help him out, right? Look how early in this game here, he could have played Sorcerer's Apprentice much early, but instead got this turn you talked about, cleaned up the threats from Floki, used the AoE to go down, and yes, this was kind of all in, because if he just drew like a random not draw card, he might have been in trouble, but he did set himself up, got the cram session to cram session, and then it was pretty much a straight run from there.
Yep, gorgeously done. And now for Floki on the other side, while we've been talking about Trahezen's Zoo, is remaining with, of course, the Rogue yet again. It would be an 0-3 on the Rogue if he were to lose this game after having lost the Mirror and the Mage, and of course the Priest on the other side. So one quite obviously putting Trahezen in the driving seat. I would say that both Rogue and Priest are better decks than Zoo at the moment, and very arguably, if you were to ask a Rogue and a Priest player, I'm sure they would argue that it has above 50% win rate against the Zoo, especially the Rogue, I think, given its very strong ability to develop its own minions whilst also removing its opponent's minions, a very popular strategy at the moment.
I think when you look at one Thief, for example, its capability to even, say, generate a Frost Nova, for example, just to slow Zoo down, because Zoo only has the board. That's all it really has to get the job done. But also you look at, you know, the prize plunderers in there, even the defensive eviscerates, all the lackeys as well, which kind of most of them help versus Zoo.
Yeah.
Apart from, I guess, the value generation ones like the Draconic, but in general, yes, the tools are all there. And this is a peak Trahezen's Zoo list, and to me, looks very, very standard. Again, I like the Cult Neophyte ×2. I think that will help a lot against specifically these two matchups that he may have versus some of the players who are choosing not to bring Cult Neophytes in their Zoo are going to be a little bit more susceptible to these heavy spell-dense decks.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this list that he's got here. I was kind of talking to some of the guys about the potential for Revenant Rascal in Zoo Warlock, because I remember when that first came out in Zoo, it absolutely wrecked me the few times that I played against it. Destroying mana against your opponent is a very, very powerful effect. But their argument was essentially Cult Neophyte is, in a way, in this metagame, just a better version of Revenant Rascal. Even if you're not permanently destroying a mana crystal, a lot of the cards that people are using to come back against a board when you're ahead are spells most of the time, if it's not a animated broomstick deck. And so I think, as you were saying, Traheson has a very, very optimized build of the deck here. The only thing you could potentially take umbrage with, I think, is no copies of Soulfire, which I do like having a little bit of extra reach in the deck, because it feels like you can sometimes get close but not quite squeak over the finish line. But aside from that, it's standard stuff, it's Zoo.
Yeah, and just final point on the Rascal as well. Going from purely what I myself have watched on stream, I have seen Neophyte do way more than Rascal. I think the one time I saw Rascals get played, because there are some players bringing it, it was just effectively playing a 3-mana 3/3.
Yeah.
And that was it. That's all it really achieved. So I'm completely with you on that. The Soulfire, maybe we can discuss later. But most importantly, we are getting into our game number 4. And not a bad opening hand here for Traheson. He has his 2 demons and a Raised Dead. I think there's some value at just throwing away Voidwalker, because it just simply isn't as powerful. But having Flame Imp and then a potential Raised Dead to just go Flame Imp again plus X can be strong. But do you think it's strong enough to actually keep in this scenario, Derek?
Not quite. I'm personally a fan of just keeping the Flame Imp in this scenario. Voidwalker as well. I guess against specifically Rogue, to protect against the dagger does carry a bit of extra utility, but I'm really just a big fan of looking for Flame Imp, curve options, and Hand of Gul'dan, as he has found, which is looking like this could be a pretty strong start for Traheson. But while we've been focusing on the Zoo hand, which has been pretty good, quite clearly, Floki has the absolute uber nuts on the Rogue side. Outside of like a massive Edwin to start off the game, this is just board control in a can. He is in no danger of losing this early game.
Yeah, this opening hand from Floki may as well be titled All of the Reasons We Said Why Rogue Does Well versus this matchup, right? It's like everything is there, even just like the not only the Miscreant, but the Shadow Step in there, which might not look that great, but when you have prize plunderer, when you potentially have lackeys that are either Kobold, Rush lackeys, even just Titanic, all of these things together will probably dominate this early game here for Floki.
That's exactly right, and it's even better than it first appears, because Shadow Step can, as you said, be used on the Prize Plunger if you just need maximum tempo. It can also be used for value if you want to Shadow Step the Miscreant. So if your opponent's not doing anything, great, just build up an unbeatable value engine over the course of this game instead.
And Traheson definitely taking a, I don't want to say unique approach to the opening, but I think at least if even if you're Legend Ladder player or whatever, I think 9 times out of 10 you would have seen Flame Imp on board by now from the Zoo player. So he's taken a slightly different approach, just dropping that Voidwalker down there to soak up some of the damage. But now Kenrithid is going to come down and make this turn pretty magnificent.
It really is a big reward for Traheson on holding back on the Dark Glare on turn 2, which I think a lot of players would have just thrown down in that instant. But even with this incredibly explosive play onto the board right now, I think Floki still is in a perfectly reasonable position. I think he can actually just clear the board if he wanted to go absolutely all out on using all his resources here.
And I also think he can afford to leave up some of the board if he needs to, and he could bounce that Miscreant.
Sure.
Right? Like, I think he can afford to just leave some of this up.
Probably Plague of Madness, I think, here. Dirty Tricks, there's a very real chance that the Zoo just doesn't activate it for like 4 or 5 turns.
Or ever.
Or ever. It's like Wicked Whispers, is it, pretty much.
Right. So it's going to be interesting here just to see how much Floki does put into the removal versus the potential value gain here. And all eyes, for me, are just on this Shadow Step usage, or lack of. Okay, he's going to value the bounce on the Plunderer.
Yeah, I think in this instance, you know, the options where you can either bounce the Plunderer or you can use a prep Eviscerate. And I honestly, I would have been fine with either. I think this is perfectly acceptable. He's got prep Swindle if he needs more value, prep this if he needs the tempo, as we were saying. It's, no matter how you slice it, fantastic for Floki here.
Hop in, the pit is churning.
The Manari Mosher is going to help trade through this taunt as well, but again, nothing's lining up. That is 2 turns in a row that 1 mana has been floated from Trison now. And of course that 1 mana was from the Dark Glare, so it was like a bonus mana, I guess. But still, that doesn't feel good when you're playing Zoo. You want to be spending every single point of mana on pressure against your opponent.
This is just such an easy clear up. The Foxy Fraud, a very welcome addition to this hand as well. I suppose the one thing you could argue is that this hand is maybe running out of value a little bit compared to the card draw that Zoo can throw down. So, you know, some way to generate value off of this One Thief would be very welcome. But at the same time, like, a rolling Fireball is still kind of value if you can use it to just destroy your opponent's board next time.
I think that is one of the reasons why, personally, I would have liked to seen the Shadow Step on the Miscreant and just prep Abyss, the Dark Glare, because the Miscreant just will get you tons more stuff. And you still have Swindle, right? It might be a little bit later in the game, but you still can play Swindle later on anyway. So, Torguide going to come down here for Trison and try and draw into something that's going to help him out.
Yeah, I think overall I am definitely coming around to your thinking that stepping the Miscreant was the way to go. But now I think the name of the game for Floki is just making sure that he applies maximum pressure on this turn whilst clearing the board, because you can't make a hard read on Hand of Gul'dan being in hand right now. But, you know, there's a reasonable chance that they just play Hand of Gul'dan, hard cast it for 6 mana on the following turn. And if they do that, you want to kill them with the... You want to do the maximum damage turn after.
Yeah, I think that turn 5 now has a heavy confirm on Hand of Gul'dan. I think before that, it could have been Giant, right?
Yeah.
Because Trison hasn't actually taken much self-damage this game so far.
Yeah, it's kind of been offset by the Manari Mosher. He's done, I think, enough to have played Giant at this point. But either way, a fantastic top deck now for Trehezen. The pretty much only card I think he could get to pull himself back in this game in any reasonable manner.
And the Expired Merchant could actually be pretty sick here, right?
Okay. So he can go Expired Merchant to discard the Flesh Giant and then draw Broom, I guess would be his chance to get back in the game.
Yeah, I'm a little bit... Okay. I was going to say, I'm a little bit surprised he tapped there, just because that makes the Merchant 1,000 times worse. He can still just Giant Broom now, which is fine, but he could have had 2, almost guaranteed.
Yeah, I do actually agree with you on that one. I think... I'm not sure exactly what he was looking for at the tap that was better than just going for the Merchant. Okay. So I'm looking if you can go like Giant Broom and then Merchant to discard the Wriggling Horror and then like sacrifice in the Merchant and play the Wriggling Horrors to buff his rushed minions. I think I might have invented a bit of mana in that play, but there's some sneaky stuff you can do here, I'm sure of it.
Yeah, I mean, he can play 1, right?
Oh yeah, there we go, yeah.
Plays Broom, and he can play 1 Wriggling.
That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. 2 8s would have been a pretty big deal too.
Yes. Agreed on that front.
Yeah, this is still a pretty solid situation. We can see Ray of Frost, of course, number 2 in Floki's hands, so he will be able to put a stop to some of this, but Darren,
it's scary.
Is this actually slipping away here?
Ever so slowly, it does look like things are slowly eking out of his control. There are many mage spells that could pull this one back. Flame Strike, Blizzard, none of these.
Yeah, I was going to say, at first you always glance at Devolve, and then you're like, well, the Giant's already an 8/4, so that probably buffs its overall stats.
Right.
I guess if it hits the Matron, great, but everything else is kind of low health anyway. Ooh, Eviscerate for the Giant, or Matron, I guess.
You can't send that face, can you? There's not quite enough burn in the deck. Like, I was thinking if you're losing this game, you could try and just go for the pure burst plan, but I think it's a little too far off.
Yeah, I think Floki just has to be okay not dying yet. This Pharaoh Cat can come down and maybe get him something good. Kartup would be insane, of course, and then anything that's sticky and just not one of the terrible Reborn minions.
Man, Floki loves playing Secret Passage with no mana available. Like, I think in that instance, you have to bear in mind that... Wow, okay, I guess he just gets prize under
what are you talking about?
What am I even
Clearly the correct play.
I don't know, like, the point I'm trying to make is that it deletes the card as a possible top deck, which is obviously very, very bad because you would love to top deck Secret Passage. But I guess it's a calculated risk because he knew that a Prize Plunderer was left in the deck, and it is absolutely disgusting, even if he wasn't able to play the Shadow Stepped version afterwards.
Here's Ray's dead. I'll be honest, don't know the odds on whatever minions because I've not kept track. But at this point in the game, it is... Tryson can't rely on Ray's dead getting him something specific, basically, is the key part here.
Yeah. There's a lot of good stuff, though. You know, Giant, Matron...
Maybe even like if he trades the Broom first, like Broom will be good.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Ooh. I guess Wriggling plus Nightshade Matron is probably just fine here for immediate tempo.
Yeah, the weird combination of using Expired Merchant to get 2 Nightshade Matrons doesn't really work out in the end. It's kind of got a bad ending to that story.
Yes,
you end up discarding the other one anyway, so yeah, I like just pretending the Merchant doesn't exist in this scenario.
It's getting scary still for Floki. He's pretty much back in the same situation he was a few turns ago now.
Still though, even with these really good pulls here from Floki, he is not out of the woods yet. Somehow, Tryson just keeps putting his foot on the pressure.
So prep, Dirty Tricks, Prize Plunderer on the Matron, I guess, or you can just go for it this way where you let rip first. Ooh. That did not work very well.
Yeah.
And you hope that this Edwin can connect face on the following turn and you then win the game. It's a good a plan as any.
Yeah, real problem here for Floki is this Dirty Tricks is just 1 damage for Plunderer, right?
Yeah.
And I guess the buff for Edwin. Because it is very unlikely that this is going to go off this game.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 Wicked Whispers. That's the real chance he's hoping for right now, is that is drawn. Because if Drazen does draw it, he will play it. Very, very likely, just above his board.
I guess I'm more thinking is, if he draws it and plays it, is Floki just dead anyway?
He doesn't swing face with the weapon, really? I guess he's likely to tap anyway, fair enough. But I was just thinking, setting up guaranteed lethal with the Edwin next turn looked good.
Well, there it is, Derek.
Indeed. I mean, it's obviously kind of a good draw for Trahezen because it's a way to clear off the Edwin, but it's kind of bad as well because we can see it's going to activate the secret.
So, okay, well, this is decision made, I guess, because Wriggling's not a demon, right? So I was going to say, is it ever like Wicked Whispers and just trade the 2-1 and then go face?
Yeah.
And just assume there won't be that extra 1 point of damage. Of course, that is looking less and less likely now.
This is going to be so close, Raven. Jandice Nitro Boost is like, it's board control, it's removal, it's potentially just damage if he wants to go down that route.
And Tryson just has to trade this Van Cleef away. And I think if he's going to trade Van Cleef away, he may as well trade the 2-1 as well, because he can value trade it.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Perfectly decent draw. Oh, okay.
Well, there's one.
Okay. And you can buff Recurring Villain as well, can't you? So that it resummons.
Yep.
That's disgusting.
Derek is disgusted.
What does Zoo do against this? Even if it gets like resurrected a broom or something, there's just nothing.
Yeah, lose, I think, is the answer to that question, if I'm being completely honest.
I was starting to believe in Trahezen's comeback. He was so close.
Wait a minute.
Canrith that?
That's not enough, right? It'll just be a Voidwalker would be the best. Oh, I guess no, it's still not going to be good enough.
Pretty good, but not pretty good enough. We are going to be going to Game 5 to find out who is the champion of the Swiss, who goes through 9-0 undefeated throughout 9 series of Hearthstone is a very, very impressive feat indeed. And it's all going to come down now to the Zoo once again for Trahezen, as Floki finally got a win on the 3rd attempt with his Rogue up against the Priest from Floki.
And that was such a close game. Every single time, like, okay, looks like Floki's fighting back, but then Trahezen would just put more pressure on board, and again and again. But it did just come down to the Jandis being pretty fantastic, creating that taunt, but also just like the final clear was enough. And as you mentioned, you were speaking about how much you liked Van Cleef in the deck, even though it wasn't a turn 2, turn 3 Van Cleef, it was big enough that it just had to be traded into, and that caused Trahezen to lose so much damage that he just couldn't finish it fast enough. So really close game there, and especially considering that Trahezen had to wait to get this Hand of Gul'dan finally procced. I think it was like that turn 6 he drew the Matron. It could have gone either way there, but really off the back of this Edwin Van Cleef, Floki did get the job done.
And in saying that I like Edwin in the deck, we'll gloss over the fact that Flick would have been significantly better to destroy the Giant and delete the other one from the deck as well. But yes, Edwin was a fantastic card towards the end there to try and win Floki the game. Just seeing some of these highlights, man, in that mid-game, I really thought that Trahezen was going to win it, even with Floki getting all those extra big stats on the board towards the end. But it wasn't to be, and now taking a look at the Priest, that is going to be the final deck for Floki. It is, for the most part, still just pretty standard stuff. I'm seeing like the kind of weirdest inclusion, I suppose, being Vulpera Scoundrel, which is a card that I think Orange was actually talking about as being one that he really likes in this Priest deck, because all he wants is cards that give him more cards so that he can keep playing more cards, which, when they're Priest cards, which are pretty good cards, sounds like a good strategy.
Yeah, it's a tough one. There's definitely a few spots we've seen in Highlander Priest where you can just make your choice, right? We've even seen still like Sticky Fingers included in decks to help out with those weapon destructions or steals, I guess, in the form of that card. But I do like Ogremancer. I do like what I've been seeing from that card, especially in Priest. Yeah, I'm not super sure about Vulpera. I personally think that there are more impactful or more readily impactful cards available, but I definitely don't hate it. So I'm excited to see if it pays off or if it comes into play at all. But if you are after just that extra card generation, then yeah, you pretty much search like any card that will generate more and put it in the deck. It looks like that's what's happened here.
Does indeed. The rest of the deck, I'm looking at some of the other tech cards that have made their way in. Wave of Apathy is pretty unfashionable in Highlander Priest at the moment. It's, we all know the power of Cabal Acolyte plus Wave of Apathy if you can get it together. But this version of the deck with the Highlander variant is a lot more difficult to actually make the cards come together at the same time. Whereas if we think back to the old school Priest, when Cabal Acolyte was still a 2/6, you ran 2 copies of Cleric of Scales, 2 Wave of Apathy, 2 Cabal Acolytes. You hit the combo every single game very, very consistently. And so for Floki, I think it's going to be a little bit more of a feast or famine strategy as to whether or not he can hit those combos together in order to maybe steal a Giant, per se, or a Matron would be very strong as well.
Yeah, and just a reminder for everyone, maybe tuning in a little bit later on here, this is a round 9 match. There will be a couple more covered, as is the case after this one, but then we'll be going into top 16, which is basically a new addition to how Masters Tour work, where we will cover the top 16 onwards instead of just top 8. So tonight there'll be top 16, and then tomorrow we'll move on for that top 8 bracket. So still plenty more action coming up, and honestly, the top 16 round is going to be pretty hype because it's no longer about Swiss scores or previous results. It's about if you win, you keep going. If you don't, you don't.
Yeah, very straightforward. And heading into this final game for both our competitors, Trahezen's Mulligan, I am, again, a little skeptical of. I think I'm just really not a fan of keeping the 1/3s in the Mulligan overall, because you have a couple of them in the deck. There are better 1-drops to find, and playing them on turn 1 against Priest, where they don't really fight for board on turn 1 anyway, doesn't feel like it accomplishes that much to me. I would rather hit the heavy hitters like Dark Glare, Hand of Gul'dan, Flame Imp. And so it's a bit of a slow start, undeniably, here for Trahezen.
Yeah, and again, no Super Zoo specialist myself, but I do wonder how much the card Manari Mosha impacts that choice, because suddenly this is a pretty good card to have on the board. Of course, you could have Flame Imp and stuff, and that could be strong, but maybe the 1/3s being demons does help out, because the Manari Mosha is a relatively new inclusion in Zoo at the moment, right? It's not, it's not often been included, so maybe that makes some kind of impact on the Mulligan. But generally, I do agree with you that having some more of the actual game-winning cards as opposed to a turn 1 play might be a little bit more useful in that long run.
Real weird choice here. It's between Raised Dead and Flesh Giant as I'm seeing it, and I think you probably end up just taking Raised Dead, but there's a few ways that Flesh Giant could be very, very cheap. Raised Dead, Hero Power, Penance, Apotheosis in the deck as well, potentially. There's a lot that can go very, very well with this Flesh Giant.
Yeah, definitely a tough one, because you don't really expect to be able to play it that easily when you're the defender against Zoo.
True.
Well, as you mentioned, there's already Raised Dead in hand, and there's not many more options to pick.
So I'm already starting to consider the possibility of Coin Elucia, because at the very least, it doesn't give your opponent an especially strong play. But I guess you're not likely to get much from your opponent, so it's probably not worth it quite yet. The main thing is just, what else are you really going for on this turn?
Yeah, I was even looking at a very strange play, because it's like a 2 to 3 turn setup of Hysteria now to put the Manari at 3 health, and then it sets up for, say, Cabal Acolyte Coin Penance to maybe steal a minion and then penance the rest of the Manari next turn. So it's a bit weird, but I like offering weird suggestions, as you well know, with the amount we've cast together. But it's just something that could be a good 2-turn setup. But obviously, the longer the game goes on, when potentially Trahezen does drop these Flesh Giants, or even arguably a Nightshade Matron, then Hysteria, of course, does get better. It was just maybe a lack of options for Floki this turn.
I mean, I like getting creative with this Priest deck. I will consider all options. And in the end, Floki goes with a pretty baseline play, which is to say probably the correct one once you stop trying to get too fancy about it.
I do wonder how precious Floki is going to be with this coin. Because although I'm personally more of just a liberal sort of style player, where I'll just be I'll just use the coin to get a good turn out, earlier on in the game against aggro. Soul Mirror is in his hand, right? And if you can Soul Mirror a turn earlier, that can be the difference in these kind of matchups.
I think that is exactly what he's saving it for here. It's such a deal breaker, especially as pretty much every big Zoo minion is really susceptible to Soul Mirror. Giant, Nightshade Matron, even Flame Imp is one of the larger minions that it can play. And they all just die very, very easily to it. So I think you're bang on the money there.
Nice cleanup for the board here as well. That Breath of the Infinite plus Penance and the trade from the 2-1, of course, can clean all of this up. And I think that looks like a bit of a win-win situation, because it also helps out with that Flesh Giant in hand for Floki too.
Yeah, it's that or trade Hysteria plus Wandmaker for me. And, Hysteria is a more valuable card in the matchup, which is the reason to save it. But getting a minion on board is a pretty big deal, I think, just to start fighting back proactively.
No, I can get behind that, definitely. He is now just factually winning on board. Yeah, can't complain too much. I'm sure I'd find someone who would argue with me on that, though. but no, I believe this to be true. Nightshade Matron now available to proc that Hand of Adal.
I mean, it's a strong old turn. If you just want to go Raised Dead, Nightshade, Flesh Giant, you can put a lot of pressure down. But while Coin Soul Mirror is a little bit of a surprise, Trahezen knows that it's a possibility.
Okay, next question. Forget that we know Soul Mirror is there, especially with Coin, right? Because of these neophytes, is there any chance of him like trying to get this done with a neophyte as well? Because he won't be able to do it this turn, right?
I like that plan. I think I like saving the Giant until next turn when you can go Giant, Neophyte, Neophyte all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah. This feels very, very smart to me.
And also, he could even, it's not much, but if he plays Tour Guide as well, then that turn can look even a little bit better because he can maybe whip the Wicked Whispers in too.
Sure.
So, look really good, but there's Zephyrus.
Oh, Zephyrus, while it's a minion, and you may therefore think that it's a little bit more immune to Cult Neophyte, it does not factor it in. Zephyrus does not realize that everything it offers you is going to cost 2 more. So while he would presumably be looking for a brawl next turn when a wide board comes down, Zephyrus will not offer him a clear. So this could start to get very, very shaky for Floki because of Trahezen's excellent timing on his threats.
Well, there's some information. Pennant's going to come down to kill off the Matron, and he is going to hold off on that Zephyrus, but you are right. I think Trahezen, if he goes for this turn, which I would frankly be... frankly be pretty shocked if he doesn't try and defend these Giants with the double Neophyte, then it's tough, and especially now that there's 2 of them. This is going to push Floki right to the limit here in terms of defense.
It's perfect, right, as well, because he even has the mana with Tour Guide tap.
Yeah.
He will then have just enough to play the Giants, the Neophytes, and that's going to be a tough one for Floki to try and fight through.
And then he has like the Wicked Whispers the turn after. Oh, he's going to spread them out.
Okay.
I'm not sure about this. This pushes, well, 2 more damage this turn.
Yeah. Not necessarily convinced on that one. I think he could have applied a little bit more pressure and drawn an extra card on that turn while he was at it. But either way, it's still extremely difficult for Floki to deal with here. As, I mean, you'd have to guess that Zephyrus is going to offer, like, Brawl, maybe Big Game Hunter, if you're lucky here, something to play. And then, like, I don't know, probably Brightwing as well.
And if there is 0 minion... This is a big ask, of course, but 0 minion removal and just hero power plus whatever from Floki, Trahezen does have lethal, right? Because the Wiggling Horror actually negates the hero power.
Okay, it does offer BGH. That's a big old deal.
Just don't click Brawl, Floki. Don't do it, because I know I probably would. There we go, yeah, BGH. They'll be able to come down and kill one of the Giants, but still, that is a lot of commitment of resources there, and Trahezen still has a fairly threatening board. The only problem now is this second Giant can and probably will just get cleaned up by Soul Mirror.
Yeah, from here on in, it gets very, very difficult for Trahezen to stick a board, and not only that, there is, of course, the fact that he has no Soulfires in the deck, so close to lethal is as good as his opponent being at 30 health if he's not able to stick that board for a turn longer.
And I know we've talked about it, but I do just go back to the fact that look how devastating the double Neophyte turn was. There was just not really anything Floki could reasonably do.
Yeah.
If he had the second Giant on board as well, there was... He would basically be facing this, but with an additional 8/8.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing to go on top of that is he could still have played Wicked Whispers after that in order to buff his board. Like, it's not like he would have lost out on damage. I think, in all honesty, that may have just been the losing play in this instance for him.
Yeah, no trades here. I think Trahezen just knows what's got to happen at this point. Throw everything down. Hope there's no way to remove the board and finish out this final 7 health.
So how do you go about this? Like, you could after a couple of trades in, maybe even look at like Inner Fire on the opposing Spirit Jailer, just so it actually dies to the Soul Mirror.
You would full trade, right? Because he wants
Sure.
full Soul Mirror. So you just trade 2 minions into the Voidwalker, the BGH into the 3/5, and then Soul Mirror just to clear.
Well, I mean, he could trade both minions in, right, and then have 1 minion left over, 6 on the other side, offensive Inner Fire, Soul Mirror, and keep the BGH in play.
Oh, that's true. Yep, you're right. That's probably better.
Not necessarily better, because he could end with like Coin Cult Neophyte instead if he finds that more
Or even
enticing.
maybe just coin hero power.
Sure. Yeah.
Just take the extra little bit of health. Either way, Floki does have a way to clean up this board, and as you mentioned, no Soulfire, no charge, means that Tristan has to build a board again.
Yeah. Yeah, it does just trade in the end. Yeah, I think I was a little bit more of a fan of the way that I structured it, obviously. But it's still a perfectly reasonable play to go for Coin Neophyte here instead. I guess he gets a 3-2 as well in the end, so sure, it very arguably actually works out better this way.
I like that. I am often a fan of myself, so... Luckily enough, though, the Neophyte comes down mainly as just an additional minion to trade with. As we can see that Tristan actually got the Hand of Gul'dan, so it means that you can just start drawing some more cards with that Merchant. And start all over again, basically.
Yeah, just trying all over to get a board here. He has Canrathad in play now, so maybe even if this board doesn't get there, there's the potential for Canrathad Prime.
And honestly, for one turn and not that many starting cards in hand, this is a very impressive refill.
That's
right. This is just a board again out of nowhere, but of course we can see that there's Breath of the Infinite that's going to help out, maybe Palm Reading, but also he can just drop Mind Flayer or the Ogremancer even just as a big sticky minion, especially with that Inner Fire. So there's just many options here for Floki.
Yeah, Palm Reading is kind of tempting only for the fact that you could get a Silence, so he can't get the Hand of Gul'dan's back in hand, or Shadow Madness, say, just to steal it, so you get them yourself. But even then, like, it's very rapidly approaching the point, I think, where Floki can just exhaust Treason of his entire deck, whether he draws it or not.
That's an interesting choice there. I think I just much preferred the Ogremancer, because you know there's 2 Hand of Gul'dans in Tristan's hand, right?
Well, that's true, yeah.
And there's Inner Fire to make the Ogremancer nearly as big as a giant anyway.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was on board with that as well.
You here for the tour?
And, well, whether you go with the Ogremancer or the Giant, the effect is the same. You're dying in this instance for Floki. He needs a very impressive final turn to pull this back, and he may have it with the Canrathad plus Broom to sweep away everything that Floki plays.
Well,
but it's still going to be tough.
Unless Floki chooses this turn to play Mind Render.
Or just generate Plague of Death as well. I think that will also get the job done.
Pick your poison.
Wow, really? Okay.
I mean, as long as he gets 2 giants down, the giant goes face, he Holy Smites the 3-2. You've got to be feeling extremely confident.
I mean, you do, but like... I don't know. What does Lazul's scheme really do here? What if everything goes really, really wrong and you want a Plague of Death? Oh, I guess if he's ending with Elutia instead. Yeah, okay. That starts to make a little more sense.
Right, we're back to No Sense World.
Yeah.
Oof. One attack can make all the difference.
A lot of his deck is just Soul Fragments at this point as well. A lot of it, as it turns out, so very little value left over for Treason. He's going to have to rely on this Canrathad and this Canrathad alone to get the job done now.
Servants of the Black Harvest!
Oh, not bad. He can still go Flaming Broom as well to add an extra 3 power on board. So he can clear up these giants. Yeah.
And I mean, this is why I wanted to pick the Plague of Death, just because you know he has Canrathad Prime in the deck, you know he has Animated Broomstick in the deck, and you know he's basically drawn his entire deck. So you can have a pretty good idea of what Treason is going to be able to play.
Yeah, and as we can see right now, Trahison's response is basically to just go all in, right? He literally is just playing all the cards he has left in this game. He can't really play Nightshade Matron anymore because the hand have cooled down.
Yep.
So you are right, where, you know, if we rewind a little bit, if there was Plague in hand and he just plagues away this board,
GG on the
he just
spot.
wins. Yeah.
Whereas it's a lot closer than it has any right to be here. Like, if he heals, he's 1 damage off dying, but that feels a lot closer than it has to be.
Radiance.
Oh.
I guess, like, Mind Flayer the Voidwalker,
Yeah.
Radiance, and say just Inner Fire the Cobalt? Or do you think he needs to, like, heal and Radiance and just Inner Fire?
I mean, I think if you end that, you would probably just Inner Fire the Flame Imp, actually, just to deny 1 damage. Feels
true,
more
true.
important than extra attack there.
I mean, to be fair, if he plays Mind Flayer Radiance, he can actually Inner Fire both, because 1's 0 man.
Right, yeah. Is he looking for answers from his opponent's hand? What is happening here?
Move quickly.
I mean, what's the last card? Because that is very important right now, isn't it?
I mean, it's not Wicked Whispers because he discarded 1 and played
Yeah.
the other, and I don't
Because-
think it's Wriggling Horror.
Oh, there you go. Because if he knows, well, he probably will just know what the last card is, so he knows he cannot take 9 this turn. It's impossible. So I guess he just wants to play the biggest minion, because now he can trade through the Voidwalker and just kill him with the Ogre next turn.
Right, and therefore Traheson has to trade into the Cobalt Spellkin,
Yeah,
right? I guess this just gets there.
Yeah,
I guess Floki can just maths it out.
I think this has actually just created a 100% win scenario, right?
Yeah.
Because there's, if he trades everything in, but he's got no minions left, so he loses. And Floki knows, again, as you mentioned, without Soulfire, without Wicked Whispers, there is no 1 damage that can happen. And he still has Radiance next turn. Or most importantly, lethal.
Oh man, what a close one here. Okay, I guess this is the alternative, is that you fully trade into the Ogremancer instead to try and stay alive for another turn.
This never works though, right?
It doesn't.
Because it's just trade, heal game. Yeah, that was honestly very well piloted towards the end there by Floki to just recognize. Basically checkmate for Traheson. So really well done there for Floki, and congratulations to him being one of the players going 9-0 in the Swiss. So a fantastic job for him. But I will rewind it back where, although I think overall Traheson's played pretty well this series, there are a few moments where I pretty much disagreed with his choice of play. And I think in that game, the double Giant with the double Neophyte could have changed everything, pushed so much more damage, and been almost immune to full removal, where that 1 Giant being susceptible to that 1 big game hunter we did see just slowed things down maybe a little bit too much for him. But it was a very fun and very close series, so I'm pretty hyped we got to cast it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun there. I think, there was some shaky spots there from both sides. Like you said, Floki absolutely matched it out when he went with the Ogremancer Inner Fire. I'm not quite so sure he had 100% figured it out when he didn't pick the Plague of Death.
Right.
But even so, it worked out in the end for him there. And as you said, for Traheson, it was just a missed opportunity for him here, as it's been the first time in history where Zephyrus has overperformed on my expectations as opposed to underperformed on him. I honestly wasn't sure if he would give Flame Big Game Hunter there, but he did, of course, and it worked out gorgeously for Floki, meaning he is our sole player to go 9-0 through the Swiss, and we will, of course, be seeing him in the top 16 to be played out just after this.
Yeah, that's it. Just one more refresher and reminder. We will be covering a few more matches from this final Swiss round to give you a taster of what's been going on around the tournament. But we are going to be going straight on to top 16 tonight. I'll be back soon, casting the next match, I believe, with Lorinda for the first match of top 16 on stream. And we will be covering some of the other top 16 matches too in a similar fashion to how we cover Swiss. So pretty cool, but again, just maybe even an extra layer of pressure on that top 16 because it becomes just ruthless. You win, you move on to top 8 for tomorrow. You lose, you had a great tournament, but you're out and done for then. So, a pretty crazy match so far. But is there anyone you've really been keeping your eye on that's looking to be able to potentially make this top 16, Derek?
I'm going to have to take a little bit of a closer look in terms of how things shook out in the end. I just got a DM this second from Norwis who says that he has come 17th at the end of this tournament, which is the most heartbreaking of places to come at the end of the Swiss portion. But there are a lot of strong players. I am very much looking forward to Treheisen as well because, being an APAC Grandmasters caster, it's been a great year for Japan with 2 second-place finishes from Alu Temu, the crowning glory with Glory himself taking the World Championship. And there's plenty more talent that comes from Japan. So I hope for the best for Treheisen in particular.
Yeah, definitely tons of talent over in the APAC region, and we are switching talent now as we're going to move on to a quick break while we get ready for some more matches from this round. So don't go anywhere, and we'll be right back with some more Masters Tour Ironforge.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Masters Tour Ironforge. We're almost done with the Swiss rounds. completing round number 9 here of the Swiss and then moving into the top 16. But we have a little bit more coverage to bring you before we reveal the top 16. I'm TJ, joined by Gia late in the broadcast today. How you doing?
Not gonna lie, TJ, I am feeling the fatigue, as I'm sure a lot of the players are. It's only to be expected given the length of this tournament. I like to think that's actually just part of the competition as well, just making sure that you can still play at maximum focus. And I think that is doubly true for our next 2 competitors who are both in the APAC time zone, which is, you know, probably the toughest one to play with for this event, but it does even out as throughout other Masters tours, we will be playing at different start times.
Yeah, this Master Ironforge is based off of Pacific time zone or America's based. Starts at 9 a.m. Pacific time, or for me, Eastern time, it starts at noon. So it's not too bad. It's 8:30 p.m. here. The broadcast will probably end, you know, closer to 10:30 p.m. But I feel for you and the Asia Pacific players and the Europe players. But you can come make fun of us when we get into that APAC time zone Masters Tour, both of them later in the year. But Wansu is going to be playing Highlander Priest in this next game. We're getting to see the nameless one. We've gotten to see it a few times today. I have generally liked it as a tech inclusion. All the kind of new techs like Ogremancer, Shadowhunter, Vol'jin, and now Nameless One I think are quite cool.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I remember seeing it be used for a lethal actually yesterday. And aside from the new techs that you pointed out, there's actually, from what I can see, an old tech in here in Vulpera Scoundrel. That's a card I haven't seen make an appearance in the meta in quite some time.
Yeah, the Vulpera Scoundrel is pretty much just in there to round off that whopping 18,000 dust cost for this Highlander Priest deck. Wansu was like, I need an epic to throw in there to bring this over 18,000. That's quite insane. Compare that to like OTK Demon Hunter, which you'd think would have like a decent amount of rare cards, cost 6,000 dust, a third, 33% of what the Highlander Priest costs. But alas, it's not about how much the deck costs, because Lambie Series is playing Token Druid. Good old-fashioned Token Druid with some new tools, I guess.
Yeah, I love to see that everything is a 2-of, nice and streamlined. No funny business with Goro the Maitri, for example, just the good stuff. And the new, or rather not auto-include card that I spot in here is the Guess the Weight. That's something that I'm more used to seeing in Highlander Druid. I imagine it's much more difficult to guess in this deck where maybe there's not so many or rather the distribution of the cost of the card is a bit more even throughout the curve.
Well, yeah. I'm trying to count here. I guess like 3 is the break point. So if you get a 2 cost, then you say more. If you get a 3 cost, then you say less. That's a pretty easy distinction to make, but still kind of a weird card because usually you don't want to be not developing at all unless you're confident that you could get to that Glowfly Swarm. But, you know, when you look at the success of the deck, maybe you all in on Glowfly Swarm and Arbor Up is the way to go. It's worked out for Lambie Series thus far. I'm curious to see how it's going to work out in this series.
Yeah, and aside from the Guess the Weight, it's also just kind of the lack of Gibberling. The build he has gone for has maybe a bit more card draw punch to it because of the Aeroponics and Runic Harvest's package, but I honestly haven't played this version of Druid for quite a long time. Also want to apologize because it seems like my ring light is also undergoing some fatigue.
We all are. It's okay, ring light. Don't worry about it.
Okay, Lunar Eclipse seems like a pretty decent first pick here. Has its best friend already in Lambie's hand in the solar version, but none of the really great activations for them just yet.
Could just use it as a Wrath here, I suppose. Really not much, not even anything to... Yeah, not really anything to pair it with moving forward.
Yeah,
So
The
might as
game
well just
plan-
get rid of the minion.
it's true. The game plan I'm envisioning for Lambie series here is probably just runic carvings using the coin and innervate on turn 4 and then try an aeroponics from there. It honestly feels extremely slow for this matchup, and Lambie series would definitely rather hit the ramp that he's running in his deck before that or a Fungal Fortunes, but it's not available. And also, there's a Holy Nova in Yuansu's hand.
You've got me.
Yeah, it's going to shut things down quite heavily. Lambie series off to a slow. Actively, the runic carvings plus something else. But if he does end up sticking pretty much anything, Soul of the Forest comes down, Air of the Ponyx comes down, double Savage Roar, any board sticks this game, it could be lights out.
It's true. Lambie series essentially has infinite damage in his hand as long as, say, he has a board of 4 minions that can stay at any point. Aeroponics, thankfully, costing free by this point because this board is essentially kaput. Yuansu with the pickup of Hysteria is prioritizing its use over Holy Nova instead, which I like. Holy Nova is a very valuable resource as an AoE to deal with Glowflies or Treants that haven't been buffed in any way, shape, or form. And of course, it's a one-of because this is Highlander. So where you can get almost complete AoE use out of a more situational card like Hysteria, I think he absolutely should go for it.
Yeah. Makes sense. Just trying to be a little bit stingy with the resources to make sure that he has answers to just about everything. With a slow start, you never know what to expect, right? Lambie series could have been just trying to bait out the AoE and rolling into a Glowfly swarm. In which case, the Holy Nova would be needed.
He can go for the Solar Lunar here into Overgrowth for free. There was a lot of different combinations he could have gone for. I was potentially looking at Lunar into Solar into Fungal Fortunes. Maybe he would have overdrawn by that point, I'm not sure. And even if he didn't though, it doesn't necessarily mean he has a strong follow-up. Fitting the Overgrowth in here, I think, sooner rather than later will be very important so that by the time he hits Glowfly Swarm, he can immediately play Soul of the Forest alongside it.
Yep. But needs to just hope that Yuansu doesn't have huge board development before that. Okay, Glowfly Swarm picked up.
I was assuming that he would have to hit it off of the Fungal Fortunes. Had Lambie known that that was the draw off the top, maybe we'd have seen a different way of approaching the last turn where he just goes for draw instead of the ramp immediately. But one way or another, he still finds a way to use the rest of his mana pretty well. And next turn, there's even more board development. So the Savage Roars are looking to get some usage soonish. This is a Vol'jin that has no room for error because there are literally no minions in Lambie series deck. This has no Gibberling, this version.
Yeah. All right, one opening for Lambie series. Glowfly Swarm, Soul of the Forest here with double Savage Roar in handed, one turn away from Plague of Death. He might just be able to barely sneak in a lethal here or close to it.
Yeah, I mean, the timing is... This is the only window, essentially, before that big 9-drop AoE that disregards the Death Rattle. I think the ramp from Lambie series 2 turns ago was keeping in mind that the turn 9 breakpoint is something he has to race before it's available. And so the most Yuansu can remove is like 2 whole sets. Okay, 3 whole sets if he includes the Apotheosis. So that leaves 4 minions on board, but each of them will deal 6 damage. The Druid's face will deal 4 damage, and hero power for the clean 29 is what I'm counting.
Yeah.
Exact lethal.
Exact. Wow. That was close, though. I was like, oh man, there's no way there's no lethal on the other side, right? But ends up getting the exact lethal. Lambi series tying it up at 2-2, and that was not a great start. It felt like Wansu just had, a solid answer for everything, but just not able to quite get there enough. And the play that you saw with the overgrowth, having just enough mana to sneak it in right before the Plague of Death came down, pretty much as perfect as it can get, as picture perfect as it can get.
Yeah, I think that was spot on from Lambi series. Again, most versions of this token druid that I see on ladder, and I guess also in this tournament, are not even running cards like Overgrowth for the ramp. Instead, everybody's running only the temporary ramp in Lightning Bloom, and instead using those slots to have a bit more minion presence with Gibberling, etc. I think Lambi series understood that when you are running the ramp version, you better make sure that when you do get the ramp, it comes down as soon as possible, because it allows Druid to build these boards at a certain sturdiness with the Soul of the Forest included before that crucial 9 mana breakpoint is available to Priest. It's not to say that if he didn't hit the ramp, he 100% lost, because we could have seen, Yansu go for Plague of Death, and then Lambi series still had, some draw with the Guess the Wait there, and maybe could have developed still with the second Runic Carvings or something along those lines. But being able to finish out the game sooner rather than later is absolutely where Token Druid is at its best.
Yeah, and with that win, Lambi series now just opens it up for the Rogue as the last deck remaining, which is a Whirl Kick Rogue up against the Highlander Priest. This is sort of the marquee matchup, I feel, of this Masters Tour, because Highlander Priest and the Whirl Kick Rogue seem to be two of the most popular archetypes. We have the biggest sample size of games on them. And even on stream, we've seen so much of both of these decks. And who do you think comes out on top after, having quite a bit of sample size on our belts now?
I'm going to have to give it to the Rogue, honestly. I think the numbers would have it in its favor, as well as at least looking at the two classes as a whole, which kind of composite all the different archetypes under those. But because on stream, and also the majority of the archetypes of Rogue have been this Whirl Kick, and the majority of the Priests have been this slow Highlander version, I think Whirl Kick Rogue has it in the data. And also just watching all of the games play out, it seems that the consistency of the threats they can put out, and just the card draw and card generation that can kind of be adjusted to each situation, because the Rogue player, it's at their discretion how greedy they want to be with their Whirl Kicks, with their secret passages. And a skilled Rogue player, I think, can really put both the pressure on the Priest and maintain that constant stream of card generation.
Well put. I think it's a tough balance to try and strike as the Rogue, but once you find it, it's not easy to dismantle a Priest, but it can be done. And, that's why we're seeing the stark differences and even just overall win rate of the classes between Rogue and Priest, where Rogue seems to be just overall the class that's performing the best, and Whirl Kick being the most popular variation of it.
And let it be known that this series is very important for both players, because 7-2 is the cutoff to most likely make it into the top 16. Not every player, I believe, who finishes with 7-2 will be there, but these two have had pretty decent tiebreakers throughout the tournament, so they both have a very good shot of making it into top 16 should they just defeat their final hurdle in each other. Lambi series already a Grandmaster, not much to prove, and Yansu, unfortunately, the Chinese scene is not represented in our Grandmasters, and they have their own version back home. But obviously, it's still a huge achievement to perform well and possibly take home another Masters Tour championship for China after, was it XC a couple of Masters Tours ago?
Yeah. And also, a good chunk of money, right? And for Lambi series, I guess just some Grandmasters insurance, right? Just trying to make sure that he can stay in it as long as possible with the Master score after the first round of first season of the year. So let's getting into this one. Lambie Series already gets the double 2-drop on Reborn with the double Pharaoh Cat opening. That's just straight up annoying for Yansu to deal with, because it's essentially just 2 1-drops that has developed this pressure, and Lambert Series has a ton of pressure behind this, with also Foxy Fraud and Swindle to back it up.
For sure, these have been premium Pharaoh Cats to the point where Lambie Series just straight up didn't go Foxy Fraud Swindle on his 3-mana turn when he could have fit it in, and instead went for the Micro Mummy to get that rolling extra damage from its buff. And I think it's pretty good understanding of the matchup, where the card draw will be good later at some point, but every bit of extra damage he can get from these bonus cards, so to say, that he generates is doubly valuable, especially since Priest, as the Highlander version, won't necessarily have the Holy Nova that often, or the Breath of the Infinite. However, this Zephyrus can stave off the majority of this damage. Worth it though, compared to just Ogremancer?
Ogremancer just kind of dies on board.
Yeah, but Zephyrus, does it even just give Lightning Storm here, which is not that great?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Overloads and still leaves the a minion on board that could trade into Zephyrus on board.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess this does soak all the damage, because Lambie Series doesn't want to play spells into this, especially with just a pretty clean kill on the board here.
I think Yeonsun's game plan is play the Ogremancer. You're not optimistic that it lives for that long. If it does, great. But either way, the next turn is Zephyrus cleanup with Holy Nova. And Lambie Series just gonna go ahead and flick this away. He can still trade down the taunt. And the flick itself is a relevant body that survives past Zephyrus AoE for the 6-mana threshold.
Okay. It's a Highlander deck, so you're not getting any more flick value than that. So I like this play.
I like it a lot as well. It's probably his best singular answer for an Ogremancer, the flick. Yansu gonna go ahead and get rid of that. The Zephyrus AoE still available for next turn. Taunt Dragon, decent. Oh, this is an expensive broom, but leaving the 4 damage on board, I can understand is very, very scary. It's just that the broom with Apotheosis in hand kind of has some additional value, or rather, it makes you even more hesitant to use it that quickly.
Give me a quest.
So much damage coming through for Lambie Series.
And Yansu's just has answers. They're just not answers that they answer the board, but they don't allow him to rebound and try and take initiative in the game himself. And none of the Zephyrs have been super clean in this situation. I just don't even know what it's.
Shadow Madness. I was going to say
Shadow
Flame, but the Madness is pretty much clearly better. Good job, Zephyrus.
Yeah.
So he gets rid of the 2 threats, and then he can heal back up. Lambie Series is approaching lethal with a secret passage in hand, though, looking for a couple eviscerates. Ooh.
Oh ho ho!
Oh ho ho.
Foxy Fraud as well, so can keep the chain rolling. Oh,
I think you play it on the micro.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, that's the juice.
Okay.
That's the money.
Yep.
Lambie Series famously coined the line, "One thief, always lethal." Maybe next turn it can still be Shadow Steps. It can still be Shadow Step. I think you absolutely go for it while the Whirl Kick is still available. You can think about playing Foxy Fraud, but it's kind of the same thing anyway, because you can Shadow Step it and it's free.
Choose soon.
Does he play the Foxy Fraud for the minion presence? I kind of think you do here, as opposed to Redagger. I just want to go all in before Plague of Death is where my head would be at.
Yeah, just try and get the what you can in. This is...
Oh, this
A
Holy
little
Nova is so clutch! And he gets a Taunt Dragon, or Taunt Post Spell Burst. Yonsu is hanging in there,
barely.
but barely might be all he needs. 1 minion sticks, then he gets Apotheosis. Lambie can kidnap this right back if he likes. But it means giving up on Secret Passage for this turn.
Wager, friend. I usually work alone.
Alright. Successfully gets the board back in his favor, and this doesn't look like a very pleasant Plague of Death for Yuansu. Oh, that is such a clutch pickup. Wait, did he just not Spellburst?
Well, it would have...
Oh, right, my bad. Yeah, it could have killed the...
Hysteria, yeah. Needed it for the clear.
for the guarantee.
Oh, World Kickmaster again!
Oh.
Spin like the suns, strike like
Backstab.
the wind.
Oh, it's okay. It's going upstairs. Never mind.
Going face.
Oh, up to no good.
Brain freeze. That's a big deal.
Now we're starting to go into the hothead. As
Yeah.
you kill it off with the dagger. A head crack! Alright, negates the hero power. There we go.
Lambie coined One Thief always lethal. Sottle coined Head Crack always gets there. One of those things might be true this series, and it wasn't
Yeah.
the One Thief. Okay, both Whirl Kicks gone, so in terms of card generation, not so much, but there is card draw from Secret Passage. Lambie was hovering over the Nova, doesn't go for it ultimately. Can't have a read on Apotheosis, but Prize Plunderer and Eviscerate and Jandis. Wait, these are all so good. If you go Jandis, Plunder, is that enough to get rid of the guy without Eviscerate? Maybe you don't
Eviscerate
even need Jandis.
plunder is. Right? Because that's 1, 2,
Yeah.
3, 4, and then the second one deals 5. Yep, and then you push through
Yeah.
the 4. Get the dagger in, and then head crack lethal.
Next turn, you're right.
Yeah.
So alternatively, this means that Jandis Plunder also would have worked, but he couldn't have fit in the Eviscerate. So it was a question of whether he valued the damage to face more so than the board presence. And because we're approaching Plague of Death availability, I'm on board for Eviscerate.
Yeah, that's game unless Yansu gets Nazari from Dragon Queen Alexstrasza or Alexstrasza. Nope.
Oh. I have lost that way one too many times, so definitely I was a bit nervous there at the end for Lambie series, but he got the win in this series. He is now 7-2 with a very strong shot of making it into the top 16. What a nail biter at the end.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess Headcrack got there, but it wasn't even needed, and Wanting did find lethal. So Lambie series and, more importantly, Sottle were wrong. So anytime Sottle is wrong, I celebrate because as much as I don't like to admit it, it doesn't happen very often.
I'm glad I had to have a little bit of a Hot Takes cameo. I'm going to consider this as a little Hot Takes mini episode where you do prove once again that Sottle is definitively wrong. And Lambie series is definitively with a very, very good score. I really wanted to say through to the top 16, but it's really hard to make these blanket statements without having seen all the tiebreakers work out. So we are going to wait on confirmation and how the rest of the round has shaped up. But I do have high hopes for this Singaporean player.